You may be seated. I'd like to welcome each of you to our worship service today. If you're a guest with us, we especially would like to welcome you and ask that you come back at any time that you see fit. We have a number of things that are in our bulletin and in the newsletter that you need to be aware of. Just take that opportunity to go through those, and as you can be a part of those different opportunities, please feel free to take advantage of those. Today, in the absence of our family minister as well as our pastor, we have a great opportunity to hear Reverend Dr. Benny Vickery. He is going to be with us today to lead in our worship. Dr. Vickery is no stranger to our congregation. He has been here many, many times before. Many of you are friends with his wife, Brenda. They probably know Brenda as well as they do Dr. Vickery, but she has been a very great asset to our community for many years, and we think the world of both of them, and we're very fortunate we have them to share with, or him to share with us today. There are many prayer concerns that you need to be aware of. Many in our family have lost, some in our family have lost loved ones, some who are sick and not able to be with us. Actually, we have several that needed to be added to our prayer list today. Are there any particular ones that you'd like to remember on our prayer list to be added today? I also would like to take this time and opportunity to ask that you pray for Reverend Vickery's son, Lee. He is battling cancer and is with his wife today and requires care 24 hours a day. So just remember them in your prayers as well. And just found that out this morning. So just wanted to make you aware of that. Anyone else that needs to be brought up on our prayer list? If not, let's continue with our worship.
If you will take your hymnals and turn to hymn number 296, hymn 296, and stand as we sing Jesus is Lord of All. Please stand.
Wonderful Master.
could have all the children come down, please, for the student story.
Loving God, we thank you for Jesus. We thank you that he is inside of us, controlling us. Help us to listen. And dear God, we ask you today, we pray for your healing hand, but we want your will to be done in all situations. Thank you, God, for this day. In Christ's name we pray. Have a good day. And remember who's in control.
If you will turn again in your hymnals to hymn number 333. Hymn 333 as we sing Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. Please stand.
Sweet to walk in this Will you pray with me? For the blessings of this and all our days, we thank you, gracious God. Accept, we pray, not only our tithes, but also our lives that we offer in gratitude for all that you've done for us. Use them both, Lord, in this place and wherever you might take us. Amen.
Thank you. It is a joy and a privilege to be with you today. I've looked forward to this ever since Brother Rigsby called me and asked me could I come and take care of this service for him, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that for him, and I'm praying for you all that the Lord will bless you with this new pastor that you have, and I hope the church continues to grow and prosper in the Lord. Brenda sends her love, but as the gentleman said at the start of the service, we're having to give 24/7 care to our son, and she is with him this morning. Pray for Lee. He was diagnosed with AML leukemia back in October. He's lost 71 pounds. Thursday, Duke pretty much just told us there's nothing else they can do. And so we're just got him in the hands of the Lord. I still believe God can heal him. I think God can do something that doctors cannot do. Now, whether he will do it or not, I don't know. But I know he's able. That's the main thing. We know he's able to do it. And so pray for Brenda. She's with him today. By the way, you like this white tie? We were watching Love Worth Finding the other day. Adrian Rogers, one of my favorite preachers, and we was watching that program. Comes on. Adrian's been in heaven now for a long time, but we was watching the program Love Worth Finding. Dr. Rogers came out with a white shirt and a white tie on. And after the program was over, Brenda said, I'm going to run over to Belk's. I'll be right back. And she ran over to Belk's and came back with this white tie, and she said, I want you to wear this whenever you go to a church, hadn't been in a while or whatever, you wear this white tie. I said, if you can't preach like him, you can at least look like him. And so that's where I'm at with this white tie. I give her credit where credit's due. Brother Rigsby gave me the scripture out of Numbers chapter 14, the verses 1 through 24, and he wanted an emphasis given on verse 18. And so I've done some studying on this, and it'll take me a while to get in. I'm not the pastor, so I'm not sure how he does the study. I'll just have to do it my way, but I've talked to him a little bit about this. But in verse 18, that verse says, the Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. I looked at that verse and I was reminded of what someone told me many years ago when our son was born to us. This older preacher said to me, remember this, your children will take what you do in moderation and they will run it to excess. And I think that's what he means here when he's talking about that it's visited to the third and the fourth generation. A lot of times children take our example and they blow it up bigger than what it was. But getting to the scripture and starting back in verse number 1 in just a few moments, I'm going to deal with be careful what you wish for. There's Israel is going out. They've come out of Egypt. They're in the wilderness wandering, and they're being fed every day. They're being going toward the promised land, but there's a lot of grumbling and complaining going on. There's a dangerous murmuring that is taking place. And I read something that really stuck with me, and I hope it'll stick with you like it did me, because I believe that the 40 years that Israel was in the wilderness wandering, headed toward Canaan, has to be the greatest miracle in all the Bible. When you break it down and you begin to think about it, a lot of times we read it and we just go over it and that's it. We go right on to something else. But I want you to think with me about the logistics of what took place while they were traveling in the wilderness. These 40 years, and yet they were grumbling and complaining. I used to tell the church that I pastored, I think some of them must have been Southern Baptists, but that was just me. But there's a lot of things that went on. The 40 years they were there, they tell us that there were 3 to 3.5 million of the Jews that left Egypt. That's a large crowd, 3.5 million. And so 3.5 million people, and that doesn't count the herds of flocks of sheep and goats and all the things that they took with them, all the animals they took with them. And so according to the quartermaster general of the army, here's what he said. He did a study on this, and I'm going to quote some of the things he said. He said it's reported that Moses would have had to had 1,500 tons of food each day to feed that crowd. It would take 2 freight trains a mile long to feed that many people every day. Think about that. If they cooked with firewood, it would take 4,000 tons of wood, so a few more freight trains to line up a mile long. When it comes to the needs of a person for their water, now think about this. They're in the wilderness. Its average temperature is 108 degrees. We can identify somewhat with that. We had some pretty hot days this past summer. 108 degree weather, and he says that it would take on average 20 quarts of water per person. Now, for that water to be there, it would be there for them to drink, to wash themselves, to clean the dishes, to water the animals, and so forth. 20 quarts of water a day per person. That's 11 million gallons of water a day. 11 million gallons of water a day. That would mean that the freight train would have to be, with tank cars, would be 1,800 miles long just to bring them the water. Remember, they didn't have any rivers out there. They just had a few little wells. How in the world did they get enough water to feed that crowd, to take care of that crowd? God provided their needs. God is meeting needs. Remember, one of the complaints was they didn't have any water, and God told Moses to smite the rock, and water came forth. And so they had water. The space that it would take to camp down 3 to 3.5 million people, it would be approximately 2/3 the size of Rhode Island. 2/3 the size of Rhode Island. 750 square miles just for them to camp. When they crossed the Red Sea, if they went across in a very narrow area where they could only go double file, the line would have been 800 miles long, and it would have took them 35 days and nights to get across. We're told they went across in one night. So the quartermaster general figured that up, and he said that there had to be a place in the Red Sea that would have been 3 miles wide, where they could have walked across 5,000 abreast just to make it across in one night. Wow. That is some staggering statistics on the children of Israel. And Moses watched the Lord miraculously care for those people for 40 years. 40 years they're cared for. And we have the same God. We've got the same God. Paul writes and says, our God shall supply all your needs according to his riches in glory. And have you ever gotten to the point, I have, where we say, Lord, I don't know if I'm going to make this next need or not. I don't know whether it's going to happen. But God meets every need. God has met every need. I think of my son and the way things have happened with him over these last few months. They were in Guam. They had to leave Guam in a hurry to get to San Diego, California. The Air Force, in their wisdom, let him and his wife get on the airplane, the C-130, to fly him, medevac him over to San Diego, but they would not let his 3 children get on the plane. An 11-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old could not fly with their mother and dad. They had to leave them with some neighbors that they had only known for 3 weeks. Well, you can imagine, some of you know Miss Brenda, she was about ready to get a rowboat and go across the ocean to get them grandyoungins and get them in the USA. And it was just a massive amount of work that would have to be done to get them home. And yet God supplied that need. And we got them home within 4 weeks. We had them in America, enrolled in a school down in Rowan County, all 3 of them doing fine. And so God met every need that we've seen him supply, all those needs. Now, you see, there's dangerous murmuring going on here. In these first 4 verses of this chapter, we think about some of the things that are going on with them. And just for an example, I want to say that if we'd go back in time for 250 to 300 years ago, the kings of the world would give anything if they could have had what we have in America that we take for granted every day. I think the children of Israel took for granted a lot of the blessing of God that he was giving them. And I think we do sometimes. I mean, think about it for an example. Let's take a look. Under the hoods of our cars, guys, most of us have at least 200 horsepower ready to go for us with a turn of a switch or a flick of a button and a mashing of the gas. We can head down the road. We get on our highways and we can travel a long ways in a day's time. It would have took the kings of 250 to 300 years ago months to travel where we can go in one day. We ride along with comfort all around us. We flip on a switch and we're serenaded by the world's greatest musicians. And by the way, you can have it either classical all the way down to country. You can hear the best music in the world on your radio. And just tune it in and go down the road, listen to that. Along with that comes news and weather. They didn't have anything like that. While we're driving, you can flip a switch and get heat. You can flip another switch and you can get air conditioning. You can drive by one of those restaurants. My littlest grandson, when we had him in the car the other day, we were riding along. He said, "Granddaddy, you know what that is?" I said, "It's Bojangles." He said, "You can get chicken there." We came on down the road a little ways, and he said, "You know what that one is?" I said, "That's Taco Bell." He said, "You can get a taco in there." I rode by Pizza Hut. He said, "Stop, stop." I said, "Why do you want to stop here?" He said, "They got a buffet in there." He was ready to go. We get food just as fast as we possibly can in the world that we live in. We wear good clothes. Some are made of silk or cotton or wools or whatever. Our homes are furnished with electricity and heat and cool and water and all of that. Our kids are receiving good educations. We have access to health care. We can travel the world on any conveyance that we want to travel on. And if we go back 200 or 300 years, those kings of that day would have paid literally a king's ransom to have what you and I take for granted every day. See what I'm saying? We take it for granted. Israel is about to learn that murmuring has a high price to pay. Especially once you decide that God doesn't know what he's doing, and you decide that he really doesn't know what you really need. And Israel's about to learn a valuable lesson, and it's high stakes of what they're going to learn. In verse number 1, it says, "And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night." That crowd had no faith, and they are not following the Lord, and the entire night was they were wrestling and writhing in unbelief and uneasiness. And that militant multitude chose to look at their circumstances rather than look at their Creator, and they floundered in their anguish. And they began to make accusations. Verse 2 says, "And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God that we had died in this wilderness." There's a pattern of faithlessness in these verses that if we can grasp the truth of their era, maybe we can avoid repeating it in our lives. The first step to foolish murmuring is anguish and faithlessness. The next step is to act upon that anguish by verbalizing it with foolish accusations. The moment we begin to accuse God of not knowing what he's doing, and the moment we begin to question him on what he's doing, we begin to free fall in our spiritual life. And I'll have to admit, I have battled that for the last 4 months. I have been battling that very thing. Lord, do you really know what you're doing? And yet, I have to put it in the hands of God. We have to believe that God has a purpose and God has a plan for every life. Every life we have in this world, God has a purpose and has a plan. These people could not physically see God, and so they begin to hurl accusations at Moses and Aaron. The term "against" here literally means they were in opposition or they were anti-Moses. In fact, as we read on along, we'll see that they're anti-God. They begin to push God out of their lives. And the accusations were not mild, they're monstrous and they're meaningless. The nation begins to make stupendous accusations. First, they said they wished that God would have just left them alone down in Egypt. Why didn't you just leave us alone, let us die down in Egypt? And then they said, well, God, why don't you let us just die in this wilderness? Now, unknowingly, God's going to grant this wish of their rebellion. They don't realize it, but they've just signed their doom. We better be careful what we wish for. Sometimes God may give it to us. I thought about a couple of illustrations here on watching what you wish for. This monk decided he would join a monastery, and he took a vow of silence. He was only allowed to talk every 10 years, only to answer a question from his superior. 10 years passed, and they brought him in before the superior, and the superior said, "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" He said, "Food, bad." 10 more years passed. 20 years now had passed. He'd been in that monastery. They bring him back in again. And he says, the superior says, "You got anything to say?" He said, "Bed, hard." 10 more years passed. For 30 years, he's only spoke 4 words. 10 more years. Those 30 years now have come to pass. The superior brings him in and says, "You got anything to say?" He said, "I quit." Superior looked at him and said, that don't surprise me at all. You ain't done nothing but complain since you got here. 6 words in 30 years, and all he's done is complain. I really like the example that Charles Schultz gave with the little comic strip of Charlie Brown. It was on a Thanksgiving, and Charlie Brown was bringing out Snoopy's dog food to him. And Snoopy's getting all happy about his dog food, and Charlie sets the dish down, and it's dog food in the dish. And Snoopy begins to talk to Charlie. You know, he could talk to Charlie, and he says, "This ain't fair. The rest of the world's eating turkey and dressing and all the trimmings, and I'm eating no stupid dog food because I'm a dog. Is that why you feed me that?" And Charlie just turns and walks away with Snoopy looking in his bowl. The next little cartoon, Snoopy said, "Well, I guess it could be worse. I could have been a turkey." Be careful what you wish for. The accusations were coming. In verse number 3, the first part of that verse, it says, "Wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land, to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be prey." The accusations go from verbally bashing Moses and Aaron now to accusing God of bringing them out into the wilderness and taking them to the land of Canaan to fall with the enemy. And then they blatantly imply that God's not able to protect their kids, that God's not doing what he should for the kids. And in uttering these foolish words, I think they crossed the line. You see, I believe this: God will allow moments of ignorance and weakness. But when we have rebellion and stubbornness in our heart, we're challenging God to react to us. We're challenging God to have a reaction. And this group decided to use their children as a source of blame. And in turn, it backfired on them. Instead of the children falling in the wilderness, it was those that were older that fell in the wilderness, remember? Those 20 years young and younger were the ones that inherited the land of Canaan. Now I want you to see some fatal answers that are given here. In verse number 3, the last part of that verse, it said, "Were it not better for us to return into Egypt?" In verse 4, "And they said to one another, Let us make a captain and let us return to Egypt." They thought they knew better than God, so they decided that they would elect themselves a new captain and they'd return to the land of Egypt. The sad thing is that neither one of these things will happen. They're not going to return to Egypt, and they will not elect a new captain. See, what's happening is they're foolishly dismissing God, and they're heading to their demise. And so we see in verses 5 through 9 some dedicated men. And in this section, we see the leaders of Israel refuse to be swayed by the foolish accusations and the complaints that were coming in. We see Moses and Aaron in verse 5. It says, "Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation and the children of Israel." Moses and Aaron are displaying reverence before God, and they're hoping that he will honor their prayers and not wipe out the people. They don't want to see the children of Israel completely destroyed. And Moses is a man of deep humility. If you read the life of Moses, he was a very man of deep humility. It'd be a wonderful thing if we could see more humility in the world today. What we see in the world today is less humility and more exertion of ourself. We want ourselves to be recognized. We have people that feel like that their needs are above everyone else's needs. Whereas Moses and Aaron saw that they were praying for the children of Israel. And so they're on their knees. And then there's two more that are standing up in verses 6 through 9. Verse 6. "And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes." Verse 7. "And they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, The land which we possess through to search it is an exceeding good land." Verse 8. "If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land, and give it us, a land that floweth with milk and honey." Verse 9. "Only rebel ye not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them. The Lord is with us. Fear them not." Moses and Aaron are praying. They're busy. While they're praying, Joshua and Caleb are rending their clothes, tearing their clothes, if you please, in a display of deep regret for what their brethren are doing. They boldly scold the doubters. They say, "We can take this land." They've got complete confidence in God. They've got complete confidence that God can do what he says he would do, that God can take over. God can move in that situation. God can take over. Joshua and Caleb refused to allow the circumstances to make them become negative. They just refused to be negative. Did we ever let circumstances cause us to be negative? Some of us were talking after the first service, and one gentleman said, you know, we was talking about, I noticed a state shirt on this gentleman, and I congratulated him on that, and thanked him for pulling for a good team and all that kind of good stuff. And I'm not trying to start a fuss. I drive a new blue Jeep. Somebody told me the other day it was Carolina blue. I said, no, it's Petty blue. But anyway, he and I were talking. He said, you know, he said he had some friends that would text him from then different times. He said, I refuse to let a ball game ruin my day. And folks, sometimes we let the smallest things and the most insignificant things just ruin our attitudes and ruin what we're thinking. I mean, we should not let the circumstances bring negativity into our life. I have to give a personal illustration here, and I hope you will forgive me for this, but it's so close to my heart, I have to tell you this. We were out in San Diego with my son, and he was going through that radical chemotherapy. And he was a health nut. He went to the gym every day. He ran 3 miles every day. He played racquetball. He was the perfect picture of health. And then within 3 weeks of this, he couldn't even lift a plastic fork to get his food to his mouth. And I watched him go down and down and down. I was standing by his bed one day, and I'll be honest with you, I was weeping like a baby. And I said, Lee, I would do anything. I would do anything if God would let me have the pain you're in and just give it to me as your dad. I said, I would get in there and I would take it from you. And my son, in all of the pain that he was in, looked at me, and he's a great Christian guy. He's a terrific testimony. If anybody had a reason to get down, if anybody had a reason to get negative, it was him. He looked at me and he said, Daddy, I've watched you for the last 2 or 3 weeks stand by my bed. He said, I've heard you say that over and over again. And he said, I know deep in your heart you would do exactly what you say. You would take this pain and you would take this leukemia from me and you'd let me have good health. I said, without a doubt. He said, but Daddy, you can't do that. You're my father. I'm your only son, only child. He said, but you can't do that for me. He said, but I want you to start thinking about the Heavenly Father. He said he put his son on a cross. And he could have come and took him off that cross, but he didn't because he loved me and you so much he let him die for us so we can go to heaven and be together. That's strong. You know, I preached for 40-some odd years as a pastor and been preaching now for 50-some years as a lay preacher doing what I'm doing now. And my son taught me a lesson right there. Don't let negativity take over in your life. Be positive. God can do things that we can't believe. And there's a dramatic moment coming to these people. The gravity of these events are now going to be go from verbalization to victimization. The children of Israel have now decided to silence Joshua and Caleb. And on the other hand, God's going to intervene. And when he intervenes, things are drastically going to change. In verse number 10, the first part of that verse, it says, but all the congregation bade stone them with stones. Now, this wasn't anything new to the Jews. They would stone people to death for the least little thing. And in fact, they wanted to stone Jesus when he was on this earth, but they didn't. They stoned the Apostle Paul, and God raised him up and let him keep preaching. They stoned Stephen, and he died. And God, they hushed his mouth. The events of this day are about to take a tragic turn. Displeasure is presented to them in verse 10 through 12, and it says in the last part of verse 10, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before the children of Israel. The events that were unfolding seemingly were between the leaders of the congregation, Moses and Aaron. But Joshua and Caleb step up. And the leaders of the leaders tell the people they've forgotten the events that have brought them to this point. There's the word the all is used 2 times in verse 10. All the people wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb. All the people witnessed the glory of the Lord as it appeared before their very eyes. See, they forgot God's looking on that scene. God's watching them. God's seeing everything that's going on. The previous appearances of God in his glory at the tabernacle were ones of reverence and awe, but in this situation it's going to be one of retribution. The people had chosen to be against God and against the leaders of that nation. And now he's going to appear on the behalf of the loyal servants. In verse 11 it says, the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people provoke me? How long will it be ere they believe me? For all the signs which I have showed them. Verse 12, I will smite them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and will make of thee a greater nation and mightier than they. The outward characteristics of Israel's sin were murmuring and complaining, but the inward characteristics were rebellion and unbelief. And rebellion and unbelief are like twins. They're always linked together. And the people had witnessed miracle after miracle after miracle in leaving Egypt and traveling through the wilderness. And the miracle of God's was the venue by which they could see God's working. The people had continually provoked the Lord in their unbelief. And it's about to be revealed to them what's going to happen. God is in awe that they could be so steeped in unbelief after witnessing the signs that he had performed. Someone wrote this. This is not original with me, but they said this: unbelief puts our circumstances between us and God, but faith puts God between us and our circumstances. Let me read that again. Unbelief puts our circumstances between us and God, but faith puts God between us and our circumstances. There's a desperate man here, Moses. And in verses 13 through 19, Moses begins to intercede for the children of Israel. And God's desire is to replace them. And their desire is to kill Moses or do away with him. And so Moses says in verse 13, Moses said unto the Lord, then the Egyptians shall hear it, for thou broughtest up this people in thy might from among them. Verse 14, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of the land, for they have heard that thou art a God among the people, and thou, Lord, art seen face to face, and that thy cloud standeth over them, and that thou goest before them by daytime in a pillar of cloud and in a pillar of fire by night. The reputation of God was known in all of Egypt. They understood that God was the God of the children of Israel. And Moses reminded God here that it was God who initiated him to go get them and bring them out. He's reminding God that I'm doing your work. You don't destroy them. They're your people. In verse number 15 it says, now if thou shalt kill the people as one man, then the nations which have heard of the fame of thee will speak, saying, verse 16, because the Lord was not able to bring his people unto the land that he sware to them, therefore he has slain them in the wilderness. Moses said, God, if you kill them in one big massacre, the reflection's going to be that you can't do what you said you was going to do. So the plea is heard. Verse 17. Now I beseech thee, let the power of my Lord be great according to as thou hast spoken, saying. Verse 18. The Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving the iniquity of transgression and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. Verse 19, pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of thy mercy, as thou hast forgiven the people from Egypt, even unto now. Moses is very skillfully interceding for a very stiff-necked and rebellious people. And he does not deny that they're stubborn and that they're sinful, but he asks God to pardon them. He asks God to pardon them anyway, to give them pardon. The scenario is laid before us then that he's going to see how the intercession of Moses is going to affect the judgment of God on this people. Verse 20, the Lord said, I have pardoned according to thy word. God is going to honor the request of Moses in this extent. He's not going to kill off the children of Israel in a great massacre. You remember when Abraham was praying for Sodom and Gomorrah? And Abraham said, if we can find 10 people that are righteous, will you save the cities? And God said, I'll save them. But they couldn't find them. And God destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, Moses has interceded here, and he's brought forth the pardon to the children of Israel. But there's still a problem. Verse 21 says, but as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of God. Because of these men, verse 22, because all those men which have seen my glory and my miracles which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, I have tempted me now these 10 times and have not hearkened to my voice. The Lord says their stubbornness and their rebellion, he has every occurrence documented. They complained at the Red Sea. They complained in Marah. They complained about the manna. They complained about the water. They complained about the meat, all of those things. And this number 10, it comes up several times in the Bible. All through the Bible, the number 10 is given. There's 10 plagues, 10 spies. There was 10 was the number of Jacob's wages to be changed. And Joseph's brothers traveling from Egypt by corn was 10 brothers. 10 young men carried Jacob's armor and Joab's armor. 10 sons of Haman, and 10 horns upon the beast in the book of Daniel. 10 virgins were mentioned. 10 pieces of silver in the woman's house. 10 lepers were cleansed. 10, all the way through. God says, I'm taking note of all this. Verse 23 says, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto the fathers, neither shall any of them that provoke me see it. So God brings it. They're going to get their wish. They're not going into the city. They wanted to die in Egypt or die in the wilderness. God's going to give them their wish. Now, the difference comes in verse 24, the last verse. But my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him and had followed me fully, him will I bring unto the land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. When you read the life of Caleb, he comes before Joshua. They're dividing up the land of Canaan. And Caleb comes and says, I want that land that was promised me. I want that mountain. There was a mountain he wanted. And there's a little children's song. We used to sing it with the kids. I want that mountain. I want that mountain that God has promised me. And Caleb says, I want it. Remember what he said? He said, I'm old and stricken in years, but I feel as young as I ever was. He said, let me at it. I'll go in there and take it. Some of you may be like me, getting a little older. We get a little older, and our mind, we say we can do that. And when we start doing it, our body says, no, you can't. You can't do that. I used to be able to do a lot of things I cannot do anymore. My wife came in the room the other day. I was down on my knees. She said, are you praying? I'll go away. I said, no, I'm not praying. She said, what are you doing? I said, I don't know, but I thought while I was down here, I'd just check and see what I could find. You know, those kind of things. But we have strength that comes from inside when it comes to the Lord. I look forward to every time God opens a door for me to deliver His word. Your pastor put a challenge on me this morning, a challenge to preach what was next in his line of sermons. And so I tried to deal with it as best I could. He'll make up for what I messed up this time next Sunday, I'm sure. I want us to stand today, and if our musician will come to the instrument, and we have a hymn of response. Number 305. Would you stand all over the house? And we have decided to follow Jesus. That's exactly what Caleb did. Caleb said, I've decided I'm going to follow the Lord. And he was a man that wholeheartedly followed the Lord. So I ask today, if you're here and you need to follow Him, why not now? Why not this time?